There's big news coming in at this hour from New York, where China has blocked the listing of Masood Azhar at the United Nations Security Council. This is the fourth time that Beijing has blocked the bid to list the Jaish-e-Mohammad chief as a global terrorist. An hour before deadline, China placed a technical hold on the proposal moved by 3 permanent members of UN Security Council to list Jaish-e-Mohammad chief under the United Nations sanctions regime. The UN committee makes its decision by consensus among its members. The proposal against Azhar had been moved by the United States, the United Kingdom and France after Jaish-e-Mohammad claimed responsibility for the Pulwama attack that killed 40 Indian security personnel in Kashmir. Now, China is a veto-wielding permanent member of the Security Council and an ally of Pakistan, and has blocked India's proposal from being adopted by the Sanctions Committee. Pakistan has been under growing international pressure to crack down on terror groups operating from its soil. The Pulwama attack led to the most serious escalation between India and Pakistan in years, with India conducting an airstrike on a JEM camp within Pakistan that was followed by an aerial engagement along the line of control. Beijing's latest blocking to list Azhar raises question about the apparent upswing in relations with New Delhi after last year's informal summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping at Wuhan. India's permanent representative to UN, Saeed Akbaruddin, has tweeted cryptically on China's decision, stating that only one big state has held up the listing of Masood Azhar. To bring us more details and share their perspective, I'm joined in by Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. I'm also joined in by our Principal Diplomatic Correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who joins me live from New Delhi. First, let me begin with Michael at this hour. Michael, this is indeed a dampener for India at the moment, because since we all know that United States and India and China have been working towards attaining regional peace and stability, especially in Asia, this move coming in from China runs counter to that goal.
Well, you're right. And I think that there is an expectation that this may have been the time that China decided to relent and not block the designation. And for several reasons. One is that there has been growing international pressure on China to really agree with the rest of the members of the UN Security Council and really agree with the rest of international opinion, which, in the aftermath of the Pulwama attack and the latest India-Pakistan crisis, there's been a lot of pressure on Pakistan to deal with its terrorism problem. So that's one factor. The other is that as China continues to build out its Belt and Road Initiative, it's really become increasingly more concerned about the issue of terrorism in all forms, and it's indicated a desire to take a stronger position against terrorism in all forms. So those would have suggested that Beijing would have been willing to change its position. But at the end of the day, China needed to signal its continued support for the Pakistanis, particularly because China was very quiet during the course of the India-Pakistan crisis in recent weeks. It didn't really come out and support Pakistan at all. It just said that the two sides had to work out their differences. And so I think that perhaps this is an effort on the part of Beijing to really signal to Pakistan that it continues to side with Islamabad.
All right, Michael, I'd like to, keep it very upfront. Why is Masood Azhar so important to China?
Actually, I don't know why he should be that important to China, to be quite honest. Masood Azhar, yes, he's the head of Jaish-e-Mohammad, but he is, according to many reports, quite ill. It's unclear how much of a role he still has in this organization. Designating him as a UN designated terrorist would not really be much other than symbolic. So I don't see what China would have to lose by just stepping away and let the UN Security Council make the move and designate him as a terrorist. To me, it doesn't really make much sense, and China would certainly not have its relationship with Pakistan suffer because Pakistan needs China a lot. It wouldn't be that upset. If China had done this, if it had relented and let the designation go through, it would have won a fair amount of support from the international community and the United States. It certainly would have strengthened its relationship with India a bit. So I don't know why China has to see Masood Azhar as so important. I think this is just really a gesture, a signal, as I said before, to indicate that Beijing does, have Pakistan's interest in mind, even if it does tend to, be quiet and not necessarily get out front and express its full support to Pakistan in its dispute and its tensions with India.
All right, Michael, do you think that Masood Azhar is just a bargaining chip being used by China at the moment to hold control over India? Because there could be several possible explanations. If you look at the Obor being one of them, there could be the Dalai Lama. Let's also delve into these possible explanations, because let's not also forget that Pakistan is an all-weather ally of China, which also has been supporting China at the OIC or the NAM.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you've mentioned some additional possibilities here. The bargaining chip issue. Who really knows why China decided to act as it did? And my own view is that it just wanted to emphasize or re-emphasize its continued support for Pakistan at a moment when Islamabad may have been wondering why Beijing had not been more openly supportive of Islamabad during its crisis with India. I just don't, given the way Beijing has been going in terms of some of the messaging that's been coming from China in recent years. We've heard China sign on to a number of multilateral declarations at BRICS summits and at the Heart of Asia summits in recent years, in which there's been statements that condemn Jaish-e-Mohammad by name. So it's like, this is really out of character, sort of out of step with that trend. So again, I really don't see why China needs to think Masood Azhar is so significant and so important that it needs to put itself out there and continue to prevent him from being designated. It just is not, to me, it doesn't make much sense.
Right, Michael, it certainly doesn't make sense. But, there could be another possible explanation at the moment that we would like to explore, which is India's growing proximity with the United States. On that note, let me also bring in our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who's joining us live from New Delhi. Siddhant, we all know that the 9th round of India-US strategic security dialogue was held in Washington, D.C., which was, of course, the Indian delegation was led by India's Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale. It is very crucial to talk about the latest developments between India and the United States. I'd like you to enlighten our viewers about that.
Well, the Indian Foreign Secretary is in Washington for last 3 days. He, of course, met the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And just a short while ago, just 1 hour ago, we got the information that he has also met the National Security Advisor of the United States of America, Ambassador Bolton. And the release by the Indian side has stated that Pakistan was not only discussed, but both the sides urged Pakistan to stop giving shelter, support and infrastructure to the terrorist camp, something that was also mentioned after the meet between the Indian Foreign Secretary and the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Monday. But by and large, today when policy makers wake up here in New Delhi, they are waking up to a new reality of geopolitics when it comes to China, because after the last year's Wuhan summit and the 4 times the Indian Prime Minister met with the Chinese President, there was some kind of optimism in the South Bloc that the relationship has been renewed, it has been reset. But it seems today that Wuhan spirit has not only disappeared, but there no longer exists such kind of spirit between India and China China will be seen as someone who backed the terrorists in Pakistan. Well, China has its own embarrassment, and today relationship will go in a different trajectory. The India-China relationship after today will go in a different trajectory because of what China has done by blocking the listing of Masood Azhar. Today is also the 1 month since the Pulwama terror attack. 14th of February was the day when the Pulwama terror attack took place, the responsibility of which was taken by Jaish-e-Mohammad. And of course, we know Masood Azhar is the chief of that terror group based in Pakistan.
Absolutely, Siddhant, and you rightly mentioned that today completes a month of that terror attack, that dastardly terror attack on India's security personnel. But let me actually go back to India's presence in the United States at the moment. There has been a commitment to strengthen bilateral security, and also civil nuclear cooperation was one important aspect of it. You must tell us more about it.
Well, when it comes to the visit of the foreign secretary, it was there was this foreign consultation meet, the foreign office consultation meet, the meet with the security officials there, and by and large, it was a mixture of trade, of security, of making sure that both Washington and New Delhi speak when it comes to the issue of counter-terror, because we have seen consistently US backing India when it comes to the issue of counter-terror. We saw the statements by the US Secretary of State immediately after India's non-military measure of striking against the terror camps in Pakistan. The word used by the statement released by the State Department was India's counter-terror measure. But by and large, it is also wider geopolitics when it comes to the entire issue. China plus India versus China. And of course, Pakistan also is playing its own role of destabilizing the entire region. But if you look at the larger picture, it clearly shows that now West and India and China and Pakistan are two separate camps.
Absolutely. That is exactly what I've been talking about, that, there is this clear dichotomy between West and India, as you rightly mentioned, and then there is the China and Pakistan dynamics. Let me bring in Michael on that. Michael, yesterday during this bilateral security arrangement between India and the United States, what was agreed upon was the development of 6 new nuclear power plants in India, along with United States support to India for its membership at the NSG. Now, the NSG, of course, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, is the membership for this is very crucial, something again which China has been blocking for India. So clearly there's the growing proximity that we can see between India and United States, which also seems to be becoming a bone of contention for China.
Yeah, I mean, possibly so. And you rightly point to these significant developments that took place in Washington during the Indian Foreign Secretary's visit. And the timing is significant given that there have been some notable setbacks to the economic side of U.S.-India relations over the last few weeks, particularly the Trump administration's decision to cut off GSP privileges to Indian exports, which, may be symbolic, but still is significant. But yes, certainly the fact that the U.S.-India relationship is going places in a hurry could certainly be a factor in China's decision to do what it did at the UN Security Council. But this is not new. I mean, the U.S.-India relationship has been moving forward very quickly for quite some years. And so I'm not sure that Beijing decided to not to designate, not to stand in the way, or pardon me, it stood in the way of Masood Azhar getting designated, that necessarily had anything to do with the fact that the U.S.-India relationship is really moving forward quickly. I imagine that it must have been something else. I don't think, though, at the same time, we should not overstate the impact that China's move will have on the China-India relationship. I think that we've seen over the course of the last month or the last year, that China and India, they are increasingly starting to come around and recognizing convergences that are more apparent than may have been the case before, particularly this idea of working together on economic projects, on connectivity projects in the region, perhaps not under the rubric of Belt and Road Initiative, but still working together on these types of projects. In terms of Afghanistan as well, the Chinese and the Indians see, I think, eye to eye on preferred endgames in Afghanistan. That is an end to a war, stability at all costs. So I really don't think that what really amounts to a technical hold that China has put on this resolution to get Azhar designated, I don't really see that as something that's going to really cause a major crisis, much less even a minor bump in the China-India relationship. As you know, the China-India relationship is very complicated, and it is fraught with tensions, particularly on the security side, that will remain in place. But I just don't see this move at the UN as something that's really going to move the needle in a big way, either negatively or positively, for the China-India relationship.
All right, Michael, this is a very interesting discussion at the moment, because as you mentioned that, you do not see China's technical hold actually becoming an impediment on India, on the relationship that India and China share at the moment. There's much to be discussed on that, and I will continue with that. But for now, let's take our viewers through this, that India's reaction to the latest blockade did not mention any names. The Ministry of External Affairs issued a statement immediately after the proposal got blocked, stating that they are disappointed disappointed by the outcome and that this move has prevented action by the international community to designate Masood Azhar as a terrorist. The ministry also stated that they will continue to pursue all available avenues to ensure that terrorist leaders who are involved in heinous Pulwama attacks are brought to justice. In 2017 too, India indirectly identified China as the UNSC member responsible for blocking the consensus on listing Azhar. The MEA had posted a statement in response to a query on Beijing's role, stating that they are deeply disappointed that a single country has blocked the listing of Masood Azhar again. On that note, let me bring in Michael Kugelman, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Michael, you just heard the MEA statement coming in from India. They are clearly disappointed. And it's an open secret that after 2017, in 2018, India did not really make a bid to have Masood Azhar designated as a terrorist on the UN sanctions list because India did not want any uneasy situation arriving between India and China, keeping up with the Wuhan spirit. But now a fourth attempt coming in from China to block India's attempt to get Masood Azhar listed on the UN sanctions list. It is indeed going to rankle the spirit of Wuhan, to say, between India and China.
Well, I mean, India will be understandably unhappy about this decision, particularly because I imagine that there was an expectation, or a greater expectation this time around, that China may end up relenting and letting the designation go through. I think a number of people are somewhat surprised by this decision. And, you know, you talk about the Wuhan spirit. Yes, I mean, that summit was quite some months ago. Naturally, the sentiment there wasn't going to last much beyond a few months just because people forget about these things. But I go back to what I said before. Even though there will be disappointment and unhappiness in New Delhi about what China decided to do, there are some very compelling convergences, some very strong convergences in China-India interests that go beyond the issue of say, terrorism, counterterrorism. I go back to what I said before about Afghanistan, how China and India increasingly see eye to eye on what's happening there and what should happen there. And on this notion of economic development and connectivity projects, I thought it was very significant back at that Wuhan summit when both sides talked about a strong desire to start building connectivity projects in Afghanistan. I don't see why any of these things would be altered or jeopardized by China's move at the UN. I just don't see that. Certainly, it is an unfortunate development, and it could cause a momentary period of tensions. But at the end of the day, does it make sense to be that unhappy for a long time about what China decided to do? Basically, this is a very symbolic thing. If China had agreed to let him be designated, Masood Azhar is an aging, ill, militant leader who could be dead soon. And so does it really matter?
Michael, I beg to differ over there. He might be aging, but let's not negate the fact that it was Jaish-e-Mohammad, that he is the chief of Jaish-e-Mohammad, and it is this terror outfit that claimed responsibility for the Pulwama attack. And let's not forget that what happened in Balakot was followed by this incident. The non-military preemptive strike was India's point that it was trying to make. And national security, of course, is indeed topmost priority on the government's agenda right now. So clearly what China has done today speaks of double standards of China.
Well, certainly. No, I'm not going to argue with that point that you make right there. And certainly, obviously, yes, Masood Azhar is the leader of the terror group that carried out that horrific attack in Pulwama 1 month ago today. But, Masood Azhar is someone who I assume, does not really have that much value beyond symbolic value. And in that regard, is it really worth getting so concerned and caught up in this issue about will China not act at the UN? At the end of the day, does it really matter beyond the symbolic factor? And I certainly agree with your point that who he is, and given that we're not that far removed at all from this incredibly traumatic attack that happened in Pulwama, which triggered this crisis with Pakistan that almost led to a war. Absolutely. My main point here is just simple, though. Is it worth perseverating on this issue beyond a few days, and why not just try to focus on how China and India can continue to work on the types of issues, the economic issues and other issues where they see eye to eye.
All right. Michael, let me also bring in our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who's joining us at the moment. Siddhant, at the same time, there are parallel developments taking place. China has blocked India's bid to get Masood Azhar enlisted on the UN sanctions list. At the same time, we have Pakistani officials coming in to discuss modalities at the Atari-Wagah border for the Kararpur Corridor. What is your stand, and what are the latest details that we can expect on this meeting?
Well, the talks which are going to happen on the Atari-Wagah border on the Indian side are basically talks on the modalities of Kararpur Corridor. Kararpur Corridor has been a long-standing demand of the Indian citizens, especially of the Sikh faith, not from just last few years, but from 1970s, and India has been raising it. In fact, the former Prime Minister of India, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when he went to Lahore in 1999, he had raised this issue, but Pakistanis were not responding. Only last year we saw, after the Indian cabinet announced that they will be building the corridor till the international border, then the Pakistani side also announced that they are going to build the corridor, and then we saw the foundation laying ceremony taking place on the both sides of the border. But India has clarified that this is not resumption of dialogue. India will not talk to Pakistan because talks and terror can't go together, but talks and terror can happen. And by and large, if you look at the global dynamics which is taking place when it comes to Masood Azhar, well, yes, Masood Azhar, even if he was put on the ban list, nothing would have happened, because primarily we have seen Hafiz Saeed on the UN terror list, and he's still roaming around on the streets of Lahore and Peshawar making anti-India speech. But what was the major issue was symbolism in diplomacy. Symbolism matter. By blocking the listing of Masood Azhar on the UN terror list, China has sent a signal of betrayal for New Delhi, which New Delhi is not going to forget very soon. Remember, China has its own problems, its issues with Washington, its own embarrassments in Western China. Taiwan remains another issue. These are issues which China will be facing very soon, and New Delhi knows that.
All right, Siddhant, my last question to you is that just ahead of the Kararpur Corridor discussions, we also were privy to Imran Khan's meeting with the Khalistan ideologue, along with several members of the Sikh and Hindu community in Pakistan yesterday. Now, this, of course, hints towards Pakistan raking up the Khalistan propaganda.
Well, we all know the nefarious design, the two case, Kashmir and Khalistan, is something that Rawalpindi has been playing around for a long time now. And of course, yesterday he met with the Hindu and the Sikh community, in which, of course, the Khalistani ideologue Gopal Chawla was also present, the same man who was present during the foundation laying ceremony last year on the Pakistani side when the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was there. But by and large, it also shows that Pakistan will continue to rake up this issue and, of course, sponsor pro-Khalistan events in London and Washington, and of course various Sikh shrines in Pakistan. We know the images coming from those places. India is going to strongly raise this issue of Pakistan indulging in Khalistani propaganda when the Indian side sits with the Pakistani side at 10:30 a.m. and will always will tell the Pakistani side that this goes against the bilateral protocol between India and Pakistan, the 1970s bilateral protocol, and Pakistan should not indulge in such activities because it, of course, it promotes secessionist tendencies, and Pakistanis well know, well, if India wants to, India can also raise secessionist tendency, but as a country which believes in the international order, India will not do that. Unlike Pakistan, which has been a nuisance for the entire region. We know that Iran, Afghanistan, and of course India in last 3 weeks have been not only summoning the Pakistani onwards, but strongly asking Pakistan on act on the issue of terror, which of course Pakistan is not doing.
All right, very rightly said, Pakistan needs to act on terror, and which of course it is not doing. But 10:30 a.m. IST is going to be very crucial for India and Pakistan, since more developments will be taking place and we will continue to follow that. But for now, thank you so much, Siddhant Sibal and Michael Kugelman, for joining us live on this discussion.